You guys are just back from lunch and everybody's going to be going to sleep, so I've got to liven it up a little bit. Everybody got coffee? Go get some if you haven't got it, you'll need it, okay? So, let's kick this off. So, a little background on me, right? You've heard the history. I've had leadership roles in various businesses, and it's kind of tough being the manufacturer stood on stage talking when I've got my competition in the room, right? But what I'm going to talk about today relates to every business. And the one thing, I said I've got a tough act to follow because I'm after lunch, and the other tough act I've got to follow is, you know, we heard from Win Sarans this morning, and my takeaway from Win's presentation is controlling the controllable. There's certain things you can't control, but controlling the controllable is really important. And the other one from Morris was the markets are changing. You all saw the graphs, right? The markets are changing frequently. And then, you know, Blanca talked about creating standard operating procedures. Very important in any business, right? Doug actually hit one that is really close to my heart, is if you don't change, you're going to hit the wall, right? Now, working, one of the titles that you saw earlier, so I'm obviously responsible for the Pan America business. I also have the great pleasure now to lead as COO of the European operations, which is really important to me. But if you don't change, you'll hit a wall, right? So change is very important to every business. And ultimately, you know, that's the only way that you're going to build strength in uncertain times, right? Times do change. So let's talk about that a little bit. You can either make the news with things that you're doing, or you can read the news. When you guys leave here, at some point you're going to jump into a car, and you've got a windshield or windscreen about this big, and you've got a rear view mirror about so big, right? Why is that? Manufacturers are not stupid. You want to look forward more than you look backwards, right? That's where a lot of the businesses that I go to work in, they look backwards more than they look forwards. And the biggest change in a business is to get people to look forward, right? Don't read the news. Try and make the next newspaper, right? What are you doing positive to be able to lead the change? And that's incredibly important. So, that being said, you know, let's just talk about some of the events that have been happening. 2020, right? COVID hit. Very uncertain times, right? 2021, political situation started to erupt. 2022, Russia invades Ukraine, and that comes with a certain set of issues by itself, right? But if we'd have been forward-looking in lots of industries, we would have known that a lot of German workers were from Ukraine, and guess where they were going when the war kicked off, right? They were going back to Ukraine to fight the war. What happened to us manufacturers? We had steel shortages, we had component shortages, all sorts of stuff. Let me give you a real-world example. In 2020, when COVID hit, I can remember locking the door at a room at ConExpo. For those that were there, it was a very quiet event on probably the Wednesday or Thursday. But when I locked the door and I went in there to work, everybody said, "What are you doing?" Everybody's going home. And I said, "You know what, I have a feeling that if COVID truly shuts the economy down, we're not going to get freight, we're not going to be able to ship things, we're not going to be able to procure things. I'm going to buy everything I can right now and invest." So the message I'll leave you to take away is, when the market goes left, just take a look on the right side, because most people follow, right? Don't just follow. When the market goes left, start looking on the right side. So let's fast forward. My prediction was right. 2024, obviously, supply chain issues become a real thing, right? All manufacturers really struggling to keep up with supply, trying to rebound coming back from COVID. It was really tough. And where are we today, 2025? We're dealing with political issues, immigration, right? Shortage of workers we talked about this morning, diversity in the workplace, all the things that you read about in the newspaper. Ultimately, now you've got European and defence issues and concerns there, and you've got tariffs, right? And then you've got the uncertainty, just saying it like it is, with Chinese and obviously the filing that's just happened at the start of November, saying what happens in the event a tariff is applied to the Chinese products coming into Europe. Got the same problem in the US, right? The US are facing tariffs, whether it's a 232 or regular tariff. You can read all about that in the news, or you can make the newspaper trying to get ahead of the next prediction, right? Maybe not. We've got a toilet point at the back. see the delay now, sorry. So let's talk about this. So if you look at the graph in front of you, it's pretty interesting. And one other thing that manufacturers are dealing with, so you've got all these things that hit the newspaper that create issues, right? So if you look at the chart on the left, you had a lot of inflation. Some of that was driven by utility bills. There was more demand in the renewable section than there was energy, right? So obviously you can see what happened. If you're looking at the top of that graph there, you'll see, basically in Germany, you'll notice that elevated utility bills, which was horrific, which was hitting the manufacturing supply chains. You'll notice with the prediction going out to 2030, things are about calming down, right? Doesn't look like it's going to continue to inflate. If you look at the other graph for the average steel prices, look at what happened shortly after COVID, for example, right? Things started to increase. Why? It switched from basically a buyer's market, right? 2020, every manufacturer was desperate for a sale. 2021, 2022, then it went the other way around, right? We couldn't keep up with the capacity in 22, 23. So let's talk about an energy shift, right? So obviously, I'm in the crane business. I know my competition, Liebherr, Manitowoc. We're dealing in that same space, but ultimately that's what's reshaping the world. We've got to stay ahead with technology. We all want to make sure that we're prepared for that next phase, right? Would you ever imagine that you'd see so many electric cars on the road today, right? There's a lot more consumption in the world than there ever used to be, and that will continue as things go. I always say to people, do you remember buying that first cordless drill? You probably still don't own it. In some cases you may, right? But ultimately, there's a lot more things drawing power out of the grid, and the grid's not capable to keep up. So there'll be work in this sector for a number of years. You can actually see that. So in 2025, the latest indicators are that renewable energy overtook the coal space, right? Conventional power generation systems. I expect that trend to continue, right? That's going to continue to go forward. You heard Doug talk about it this morning. There's an awful lot more work on the turbine side of the world. So a lot of stuff going on there. So let's talk about AI. I heard about that a lot. The caution I would give you is, there's a lot of people, if you ever invest in the stock market, let me just tell you something. You can focus on the latest, greatest and fancy technology, and it's usually very volatile, right? It's going to go up and down. You may get lucky, you may lose, right? The one thing I can tell you with AI, we use AI a lot in Tadano. Right? We've started to use it a lot. We're using it to be able to give customers the information without them having to call us, right? And it's working. It's helping with the workforce issues, right? We all talked about people. You heard a lot of people this morning, Katie, Blanca, and the team talk about, the toughest thing is trying to get more people in the business. We don't make more people, we've got to attract more people to this business. So bridging the gap with technology is really important. The guidance I would say is don't take it too far, right? Just remember who the customer is. There's one thing that AI will never replace is the customer relationship, right? That's incredibly important. You can have the best technology in the world, but the reason you guys are all in business and doing as well as you're doing today is because you're leveraging that relationship skill. That's equally important. I went to a presentation probably about 6 months ago now, and there was a gentleman presenting on AI, Association of Equipment Manufacturers, and that person said, you can put all your children through college, you can put them through higher education, you can do all that other stuff, but you know what? In the future, they won't need to be educated. AI will take over all of that. But the one thing AI can't do for your business is the personal interaction relationship. Trust me, I don't care what business you're in. I started with the construction space, ended up on the crane side. People relate to people. There's no computer in the world that will take that away, right? So just remember that. A diverse workforce, equally important. Why? We talked about the women in the business today, we talked about the men in the business. I can tell you there's an awful lot more leadership on the women's side of the business than there used to be 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? That will continue. Focus on technology, where only the areas that will help your business. If it doesn't help your business, ignore it, move on, right? What do you want to do to be able to make the next 5-10 years more successful than today. But there's a lot of technology to be able to help you. So a lot of people invest in electrification, right? There's a lot of crane manufacturers out there. There's a lot of good products out there that do a really good job. You'll notice I'm not just saying Tadano here as well. I know we've got Liebherr on the screen there as well. I put that up there deliberately. A lot of quality manufacturers have been investing for years to be able to get into the electrification space. Why? It's not because it's great today, but 5, 10, 15 years from today, that's probably going to be a space that you need to be playing in. When we built the EGR, for example, right, the Tadano rough terrain, obviously being with a Japanese company, very long-term thinking. Now I can tell you, used right, that is an absolute plus. Used wrong when the economy's doing this, it'd be a disaster. Probably can tell from my accent, I'm not just Japanese, right? So, that being said, I would say, think about technology, think about trends in the industry. Where's it going? If you read the newspaper, you'll always be behind. Your objective is to take that news and say, okay, here's where we're going. Very few people do that well. And clearly, there's a few manufacturers out there that believe eventually electrification is going to take over. Tools that make it easier for the customer, right? I can remember the day that I used to try and call a taxi. I lived in my hometown of Redditch back in the UK. And I remember 5 6s would go get me a taxi. I can't remember the last time I called a taxi number. It's Uber or Lyft or something else, right? But ultimately, everybody's using cell phone for everything, right? We've actually launched a program, and you'll see more of that by the time you get to Econ Expo, but back in Bama, along with other manufacturers, we're leveraging AI to be able to help the customer make that decision faster. Somebody said to me a long time ago, so clearly moved to the US by way of background in 2001 from the UK, and I had an older gentleman say to me, we try and make things really easy. When was the last time you went into a store in the UK to go and get a prescription, your medication or whatever you needed? That's what I did. Typically, he said, in the US it's totally different. You'll go through the drive-through. Now guess what? There's drive-throughs everywhere, right? That's a pretty common thing. So again, life is becoming easy. The opportunity for technology is to drive that efficiency in your business that can be measured. Don't forget, right? Remember what I said at the start, right? Wim did a very good job at the start there, controlling the controllable. Measure those things that you know you can change in your business. The other stuff is noise. I can tell you, the European operations is my 26th business that I've been in, right? At some point or another, either with Terex, before Terex, or obviously now on the Tadano side. And I can tell you, usually get into a company and they say, hey, I've got a great business, we measure everything. Usually once I hear that statement, I can tell you that business is not on the tracks. There's hardly any focus, because you can't measure everything, right? As we all know, we can't solve world peace, right? You can't go in there and say, okay, we're going to do everything at once. It's never going to happen. You haven't got enough resources, you can't afford it. Focus on those things that you can drive change with. That's really important for everybody. And obviously, with tools like AI, technology, that's really important. Our business, like several others, we're ahead of our times trying to think, okay, what's that next phase going to be? What can we actually do to take the business forward? So obviously electrification is one area combined with technology. So let's talk about that, right? We've talked about the fluctuation, and AEM actually give me a pass for this chart, just point of reference. But ultimately, let's talk about, the things that we can't change. Currency, FX, right? Hey, how many people in the room would love to be able to bet on FX? Right? You make a lot of money doing it, right? There's a lot of people that won't bet on FX because you're a big winner or you're a big loser. There's no in between, right? So ultimately, you can see the changes here with the various currencies, and you can see the various trends in the currencies. But ultimately, that piece you can't change. But ultimately, if you're reading the newspaper, you can get an early indication, a heads up on where the markets are going. We talked about the renewable sector. You heard Doug talk about crawler cranes in the renewable sector. Look at what happened in 2021 with crawler cranes, for example, right? There's a lot of opportunity there. Those peaks and troughs generally either ahead of the news or they follow the news, right? But ultimately, crane demand is all over the place. For a manufacturer, it's really tough to deal with. Managing supply chain issues, managing political issues, uncertainty in the marketplace. And then just think about all the uncertainties and the things that are going on. Think of the challenges your business faces today. People forget about insurance, right? Insurance is really expensive if you're in the crane or transportation space. Think about insurance. You can control that, right? What can you do to drive safer activities? What can you do to leverage the business that you have? What can you do to combine your insurance coverage, right? There's a lot of other things there. Interest rates, right? If you're buying at the right time and you're investing at the right time, we're talking about tariffs, right? Think about the situation right now. You've got tariffs out there. You know most manufacturers are not passing on all of the tariff, right? You basically get a piece of the tariff or you get a portion of the tariff, but you know what that is, dealing with all the different manufacturers. Do you think eventually that additional tariff piece that the manufacturers are consuming is not going to make your business at some point? It's got to, right? Nobody's going to eat it forever. The other question I get asked a lot all the time is, okay, so the markets are changing. Why do you think you're still getting orders even after the tariff was issued? Well, guess what? There's a piece that wasn't passed on, right? There's a lot of smart people out there that are saying, hey, I know that tariff is probably around 20-something%, and I know that they've only passed on a piece of it. The other piece is going to come, so I'm still going to buy. And then the other question I get a lot of is, do you think the tariffs will ever come back? Do you think the government is ever going to say, hey, that money you give me, I'm going to give it you back? Right? That doesn't happen, right? Ultimately, will there be incentives out there, tax incentives? We all hope so. Do I think the governments around the world will make basically a level platform where they turn around and say, okay, we want a fair market, fair competition? We talk about the European businesses, and it's great to actually be in Europe here, but talk about this. Because you've got situations that, European companies have really been held accountable for to build safer cranes, to build high quality cranes, to build, various things that add to the crane industry, right? We have to talk about things like data protection and things like that. A lot of other companies around the world don't have to think about those things. A lot of European businesses have to think about that data protection side and other stuff, right? So again, keep in mind, the question that I would have right now is how much more of that tariff is coming and what products are going to come on. One thing, I'm proud to be in the US right now. I enjoyed growing up and being born in the UK, but I can tell you one thing. I'm absolutely questioning whether our president of the US really understands what that light switch does, right? We're in the crane space. You've got cranes actually coming into the US right now, and the light switch is flipped. They say, okay, you've got to pay 20% more on that crane coming in. I can't stop it. It's already in transit, right? There's nothing I can do about that. Guess what? If the China tariff thing happens in Europe, guess what's going to happen? That crane's going to be on the water. That light switch is going to get flicked. We think maybe the end of November, end of this month. Then what's going to happen? Who's going to pay that tariff, right? But there's a lot of things that happen in the market that we don't control. But if you read between the lines, you can get ahead of some of that stuff. So think about that. There we go. So ultimately, balancing today's energy and really efficiency with tomorrow's vision and strategy, right? That's really important. The other thing a lot of businesses do, I told you, they try and measure everything, right? There isn't just a few KPIs that they really focus on, right? One of those KPIs could be diversity in the workplace, right? Safety could be another great KPI, right? A lot of things, first aid training, all the other things that can add to the benefits of the business, but don't forget the KPIs that are close to the customer. I think in all the businesses that I've operated, I actually had this conversation with somebody earlier, but I basically try and pull people in a room and we pull rank, right? So we basically say, okay, everybody leaves their titles at the door and everybody's opinion counts. The other thing we try and do is make sure we've got a diverse audience and they all are encouraged to speak up. That's how we build tomorrow's vision. And we talk about what's in the news, where are we going, what do you think that news means for the future? What have we got to do in our businesses to adapt? Very, very important. So let me leave you with a couple of bullet points. Stay focused. Everything in your business can't be a focus. There's a handful of things that are critically important for the business, and there's probably a handful of things critically important for the team. Great businesses are built by great teams, right? There's no question there. You can have the best business in the world with a bad team, disaster, right? But if you've got a good business measuring the right things and you stay focused with the right things, you can really achieve some great stuff. So a little bit of background on that. I don't normally share financials. One of the businesses that I inherited in basically North America, clearly I can't talk about Europe yet, started that job in October. One of the businesses in North America I took over in 2022. Between 2022 and the end of 2024, we grew 254% in a market that was flat. That was no accident. All it was getting our team very focused on what was really important for the business. There is nothing stopping anybody in the room doing the same thing. So opportunity awaits, right? The future is bright if you look for it. Expect change. It's coming. The markets are going to change. Political situations are going to change. You can't predict if there's going to be a war, right? But expect it. Be prepared for it and adapt. The other thing is remember again, going back to what Doug said, if you don't adapt, you're going to run into the wall. It's going to happen. Never stop seeing opportunities, right? There was a few people out there that said, hey, I could see this was going to happen and here's how we got around it. So keep looking for the opportunities. They are out there. But you know what? As a leader, a good leader is always going to look back at the team and say, what do you think is important? Use technology with a purpose. I see a lot of businesses that waste sometimes millions of dollars, right, without a purpose. Trust me, the best, fanciest, shiniest object is not the one always that's going to make you money, right? Think about that. Measure only what's controllable. You'll be amazed walking into a new business, walking into your own business. Ask your teams what they measure, and then just try this once. Ask them why they measure it. A lot of people in some of these complex businesses are going to say, well, I measure this. Why are you measuring it? Well, we've always measured it. You've heard that comment before, right? Why are you doing this? Because I've always done it. So why do you think it's important? I don't know. If they don't know, immediately rip it up and tell them to stop measuring it. If you don't think it's important. Ask the easy questions. That's the other thing. Everybody thinks they know what happens in their business. Walk around. This is the guy that started, actually, we were talking about it earlier yesterday, but this was the guy that was actually in that man's yard over there many, many years ago, shot blasting a piece of equipment, right? And you'll be amazed if you speak to some of these people in various parts of your organization, they will tell you where the inefficiencies are if you'll just take a couple of minutes to listen. For those that don't know, every factory that I've ran or operated, I've worked on the factory floor. Not because I want to, right? Not because it's a great job or hey, I want to be friends with everybody, right? I want to learn. You know the best way to do that? Go work with the people that do the job. Take the time. I heard a couple of people say, you know, I started in the rigging industry, right? That's how I started before I become an owner. Really important. I started as an operator. Really important. I started pressure washing equipment way back in the day, right? But just keep asking the easy questions to those team members in various places in the organization. They'll tell you where the opportunities are. Point to the back. Start with the basics, right? If you're measuring 50 things, it's too many, right? Start with 5 or 10 things and do it really well, and move on to another 5 or 10. That's where the opportunities are. Adapt fast or fail, right? The markets are going to change, people are going to change. You'll have retention issues, we talked about that before, right? That's going to happen. Make sure you've got standard operating procedures, right? That's really important. Remember to change the SOPs when things change, because that's the piece that everybody forgets. I've put a new operating system in there. I've got SOPs, but you know, the operating system then is updated, but you forget to go back and add those steps in an SOP. So remember to adapt fast or fail and stay on track. And most important thing, and I'll wrap up with this, right? Don't just read the news, make the news. And with that, I appreciate your time. Thank you for staying awake.
Who's got a question? Yeah, okay, maybe in a minute. At risk of you giving us a sales pitch, what actually is the focus of Tadano?
Oh, that's great, yeah. Hey, Liebe and everybody at XCMG, Liebe, Matt, what can you leave the room? Okay, so, you know, clearly I would say, you know, we're going to do, at the moment, obviously, we've done a lot of things over the past several years. So, if I start, right, I would say our Pan America business is probably the most developed in the company when it comes to integration. We've acquired a lot of companies in a short period of time. You know, if you just look really at you know, 24 going into 25, we acquired a small company in Japan called Nagano. And then we actually went after Manitex International. And obviously, most recently, the IHI Transportation Systems business. We're absolutely full-blown integration. I would say in North America we've done a really good job. I'd say there's still a lot of work to do in Europe, honestly. Clearly I didn't just get the position just because. Ultimately I would say, you know, Tadano is committed, right? So Tadano acquired a business, I've got to give you the background on this. So Tadano acquired the DMAG business, not because it was a great business, trust me. We were losing millions and millions of dollars. I was 23 and a half years with Terex. And Tadano actually said, listen, I want to be in this long term. I've got this all-terrain product. I want to prove with the other all-terrain product. I want to combine our quality, right, with the highest technology. And that was the reason for the acquisition of DMAG. But I think what we didn't do, and I would give this advice to everybody in the room, if you acquire a business, don't be scared to rip the bandage off, right? We didn't. We left the bandage on and we tried to make it work. I think we're doing okay. Definitely not as good as what we should be doing. So over the next, you know, 12, 18 months, we're going to do a lot of focus on our European operations. You know, clearly we've got a very strong position in Pan America. Europe, not as strong, but soon to be. And obviously at the same time, we've got to continue to make sure that we really integrate the products into our Tadano operations. You know, we've got typical Japanese style, very high quality. We've got good technology now, obviously, with obviously what we acquired on the DMAG side. So just, you know, we've got to refine the operations. And, you know, I was talking about metrics earlier. We were measuring way too much, right? We didn't really focus on the priority. Priority number one, I wouldn't be standing here without the customers. So if you do business with us today, thank you. If you don't, give me an opportunity. Okay. Great question.
In terms of all the new factories then, is one factory like another, or are you going to have to try and find time to spend in each of the ones in Italy and everywhere else?
The answer is yes. Yeah, so we've got factories all over. So when we acquired the Manitex business, just to give you an idea, so we did the acquisition January 2nd. We've got 2 factories in Italy, 1 in Romania, we've got 1 in the US, just outside of Austin. And we've got a couple of locations in Latin America, and they are all different. Everything's different. I would say what we're doing in Austin, Texas right now is kind of a hybrid between what Tadano has in Japan and kind of what we've got in Europe. So we're kind of doing a bit of both there. Really with the European operation, we've got a really good factory. Clearly we closed one of the facilities because our footprint was way too big. So we're trying to consolidate more like we've got in the Austin, Georgetown business, where we try and have everything under one roof. So yeah, clearly won't get there in Europe. We need 2 factories, but we didn't need 3. Point of reference. Okay. But they are different. Yeah.
And in a way that you have your input rather than sending someone else.
Yeah, exactly. So I went there, I think I first went to Europe. Actually, obviously, I went to the DMAG factory a lot when I was with Terex, right? But obviously once I joined Tadano, I didn't really have a need apart from customer visits or whatever, but, you know, when I went to Europe, I just couldn't believe that we were actually taking, you know, chassis from one factory to another factory to put the upper on it. It's just like, this is common sense, right? If you just look at it from a process perspective, it doesn't make any sense at all. But when you looked at the geography, you know, we had stuff spread everywhere. So we would spend a lot of time logistically moving stuff around. You know, a lot of people look at what Tadano did as a downsizing exercise, specifically in Europe. I can tell you, that wasn't a downsizing exercise. That was a strategic move to do something we should have done within the first 12 months. We didn't do it. And honestly, that was probably, you know, we could have done better there, I think. Ultimately, you know, we're gonna drive efficiency in that factory like nobody's ever seen before. I'm confident of that. We've got a good leadership team in there. You know, there's a lot of things we're focused on, but again, we can't solve world peace overnight, right? You've got to one bite at a time. You've heard that you can't eat an elephant all at once, right? It's that same thing.
Okay. Any last chance for a question, everybody? No?
Thank you for the time.
Thank you.